Here we go again, another week. This will be the overview for the assignment for the week, which let me move over to the tab which we'll be using. It's pitch your story. This is really the first part of the final project where we're starting a new unit where the final project will be a new story that you're going to come up with, and you're going to try to use everything that we've learned so far in the term about what makes a good news story and kind of roll it into a story of your own. Now, there's a worksheet and there's a link to a web page that has a bunch of videos on it that talk about making a video in the different parts of it, like the BRoll, the introduction, stuff, using statistics and images. That's optional, and it's really only for those of you who are going to make a video for your final project. However, with that being said, well, it's a lot of noisy traffic back there, sorry. If you're going to do a written news article, it's still a good idea to look at those little videos and see what they're talking about, because even though you may be just doing a written piece, you could still use statistics, you can still use images, you can still think about the tone of your writing, right? Even though, when you speak, it's very easy to use tone, like a lot of you had mentioned in your last week's assignment, that a lot of the news shows had an alarming tone to it. You can still do that in writing. So, it's a little bit more difficult. I know you're just learning how to write, but it's something that you can practice with and play with now, okay? So let me go back to this here. The worksheet for Pitch Your Story is really talking about different aspects of making a story. Like, for example, the headline, right? What's a good headline? Something that's going to catch people's attention. And this is true if it's a video or if it's going to be a written piece. Also, the background of the story. Many of you, almost all of you, mentioned that when you did your video review last week that there wasn't much of a background given. And I'm kind of curious if that was true or not. Whether you do a written piece or a video, there's usually some indication of a history or a reason for the story taking place or what happened that was reported. So pay a little bit more closer attention to that. The next thing that we're going to talk about down here is the questions of inquiry. Usually a news report is actually answering a question that people may have. Oh, what were those sirens that I heard earlier today? Why is the store closed? There's always usually a question behind a news story. So think about, what might the question be? Okay, and this is true if it's a sporting event. Why did that one team win versus the other team? It could be any type of question. Try to think of two, one minimum, but two preferable. Also, you want to list the characters, just like any good story, right? There's characters. There's a protagonist, an antagonist, the hero, whoever it may be. This may be very difficult to think of, so I want you to give it a good shot at it, but you may not be able to determine who the characters are, but I want you to try, okay? Opening shot. This is something you might want to think about. Even if it's a written piece, you might want to put images in there. So use Google Images and try to look for an image that you can put in there. Remember, actually, I'll open it up really quick. When you were looking for an image of a news story, for example, if you were to do COVID-19 and you go to images, you can go to free images or fair use images by going to the settings, I believe. Nope, actually it's under tools. And you want to go to usage rights. And under the usage rights, any of these four down here, you can reuse without citing where you got it. Okay, so even if it's a written piece, you can put that in there, okay? Also, a B-roll. Now, this you will not be able to do, I don't think, if you're going to, well, that's not really true. Even if it's a written piece, you can do a B-roll. A B-roll is, for example, let's say you're doing a story on a restaurant and it's opening back up because all the restaurants have been closed in your city because of COVID. And so it's kind of a big deal. So you want to do a news story about this restaurant opening. A B-roll would be something like you just go in and you film people in a restaurant ordering food or people in a restaurant eating. That's a B-roll. It has a little bit to do with your topic, but you're not actually talking about what is being filmed. Now, a B-roll, if you're writing something, you might want to say, lots of people are going in and ordering food in a restaurant. A lot of people are happy to see that the restaurant is open. There's a lot of traffic in the restaurant. You're not really saying much. You're just saying, well, the restaurant's open and there's lots of people going in, lots of people going out, lots of people sitting down. You see lots of people wearing masks. You see a lot of people not wearing masks. That's a B-roll. You don't really say anything other than what you see, okay, to describe the scene. That's what a B-roll is. Once again, I already talked about images, but you also might want to have, like statistics. And a lot of you mentioned last week that your news articles did have statistics. Another really good thing to do is go into Google and type graph or chart, and then you can do whatever you're doing your story on, COVID-19, for example, and you can find charts that are already freely available. And this, look, is even labeled for reuse. So all these charts you can use, and you don't have to cite where you got it, okay? So even if you're doing a video, you can grab these still images and put it in your video if you know how to do that. Or if you're doing a written piece, you can just go ahead and copy the image and paste it in your Google Doc, okay? So that's what that will be. And once again, this assignment is almost the same thing as your final project. You can change the topic later if you don't like it, but this is just kind of running through what you're going to do for the final project. So talked about images. Do you have any opinion about the issues addressed in the story? It's saying, please explain how you will ensure that your point of view does not distort the final story. Now, this is bias, and we're going to talk about bias next week, I believe. But once again, and I wrote in a couple of your papers for this last week, that when people are using an alarmist or very serious tone in their news story, is that bias? Are they inputting bias? I think one of you said only that the news story was very flat in monotone, and there was no perceivable feelings in the story. Is that non-biased? So when someone is very like, this is an outrage, we can't believe this is happening, is that inducing, is that putting in bias into a news story? So explain, do you think that you have an opinion? Do you think that that would add bias to your story? It's okay if you do. A lot of news organizations, they allow that and they think it's perfectly fine. And you may think it's perfectly fine. So defend your choice there. The final question is, describe how your story will be balanced to show more than one perspective. And I've talked about this in other lessons, right? There used to be a law in the United States where a news broadcast had to have two points of view, right? That's no longer the case. But in your story, do you think that you would want to have two points of view? Who would they be? If there's restaurants opening up, you might want to talk about maybe the people who think that, restaurants should not be opening right now. It's too dangerous. And maybe you might find another person saying, no, we need to open more restaurants because people are losing their jobs and they don't have money to feed their families, so they need to work. So you can find 2 points of view pretty easily on every story. Now, that will be the worksheet that you'll be doing. Once again, I do have it posted here in Google Classroom. And I want you to remember, when you're thinking about your stories, about the 5 ideas about timeliness. Is it happening now? Is it affecting people now? Proximity. Is it close to where you're at? Does it affect you? Does it have conflict or controversy? Right? Does it have a human interest? Right? Like, are people just interested in this because it is something that people find fascinating? Right? Or does it have relevance? Or I should say, does it have relevance? Right? Is it relevant to you? Does the restaurant's opening, does that affect you? Right? Also, you might want to look where you're going to look for your story. This is kind of the hard part, especially since most of us are still locked down or locked into our houses and we can't go outside. But you can look in the news, the current news, to get ideas. You can listen to your mother and your father talking at the dinner table, perhaps, or if they have friends come over, which they might, listen to them in their conversations. What are they talking about? Is that a potential story that you can use, right? Eavesdrop on your parents, right? I'm giving you permission. So those are places that you can find some of these stories. Now, that will be the unit for this week. We will be meeting on Thursday, like we always do, to talk about the lesson. Start thinking about this. This is kind of a little bit more involved of a worksheet, but it's kind of an interesting one, and there's a lot to it. And this will definitely help you with your final project. Okay, so you can write me or Google chat me or whatever if you want to meet with me if you have any questions, but usually you guys seem to have this under control, so I'm around if you need help. I'll see you on Thursday.